So instead of kind of operating within an internalist intellectual framework, which I earlier explained in relation to Eurocentrism, Trotsky actually, without using that word, operated an interactive framework of analysis. This interactive framework is reflected in the first term of his idea of uneven and combined development. So this is very crucial and has very important implications. So I try to kind of explain each of these three terms in turn. So unevenness, combination, and development. And I should also add that in Russian language, like Persian, noun comes before adjective. So actually the order of these terms in actual original Russian is development, uneven, and combined, i.e. development is always uneven and combined. But actually the order in which these appear in English is also useful in the sense that I think it better reveals the kind of fundamental significance of his interactive mode of thinking. So unevenness in uneven and combined development means that at any given time, social world exists or in a kind of in a diverse form. In other words, there are different societies within the world at any given time, and these societies are different, uneven in their level of development, in their natural endowments, in their geographical location, in their cultural concepts and practices, and so on. Now, I should also add that you don't necessarily find this exact formulation in Trotsky's own writing. What I'm presenting to you is based on a huge amount of research in recent decades, from early 2000s, I would say, in the field of international relations on Trotsky's ideas. So you couldn't necessarily find this exact formulation I am telling you in Trotsky's introduction to the history of Russian Revolution, but I think anyone who is familiar with this literature would agree that the kind of rearticulations which I partly draw on is consistent with the logic and internal kind of constitution of Trotsky's ideas. So unevenness therefore means that at any given time there are many different, more than one, if not many different, more than one form of social formation which have different kind of developmental patterns and tempos and so on. Now, here is a really important moment in the theory, because as you see, the point of departure is not a single society. We are not talking about one society. We begin from the idea of unevenness. There are more than one society. And therefore, at the very beginning of his theoretical kind of framework, Trotsky avoids internalism, which is central to Eurocentrism, as I explained earlier. Because the moment you begin from the idea of more than one society, you already recognize and allow for causal significance of interaction and relation between these societies. And this becomes kind of clearer in the second element of Trotsky's idea, which is combined or combination. So the idea here is that there are more than one societies in the world at any given time. They are different in developmental pattern, in cultural practices, and the geographical and geopolitical location, and so on. And these are interacting, and this interaction leads to combined forms of development inside of them. In other words, the internal pattern of each society is interlocked with patterns of development of other societies. And the way in which this interlocking showing itself is through generating hybrid patterns of development, combined forms of development. I will give you some kind of specific examples at the end to kind of clarify this. And the third element is development. So here, development in the idea of uneven and combined development is almost opposite of the idea of progress. So it's not about linearity. It essentially refers to processes of directional change over time, which can be theorized by analyzing the causal properties of particular structures of social relationships. This is, I'm quoting from the works of Justin Rosenberg. So development essentially is therefore a, theorizable configuration of social relations affecting directional processes of change over time. Now, what is crucial is to see that development is therefore the process in which this unevenness and combination actually manifest themselves. And it also means that development processes of large-scale processes of change are always uneven and combined. So these three terms of unevenness and combination and development always come together, because this idea of Trotsky is a trilateral. It has three elements: uneven and combined development. And here you can see that, unlike Eurocentrism, this idea does not kind of assume that there is possibility for any endogenous development as such, that all developments are always influenced and partially shaped by developments outside of it. And also it rejects the idea of homogeneity, because the more each instance of development involves combination of different patterns of development belonging to different societies and parts of the world. And this combination constantly produces different forms of development rather than the same kind of development. So therefore, for uneven and combined development, phenomena like fascism or a workers' revolution in a pre-industrial society like Russia in 1917, or a religious revolution in 1979 in Iran, these are not exceptional or anomalous or pathological phenomena. Rather, these are actually integral and intrinsic to modern world development, because modern world development, like all processes of development, are always uneven and combined. So to clarify these terms, I think in terms of examples, I think it might be useful to use the Russian example, given that Trotsky formulated his theory in relation to Russia. So for Trotsky, in Russia of early 20th century was part of a global structure of economy and development and politics. Within this global configuration of social and economic and political forces, there were different societies at different level of development. So Russia was partially industrialized, but predominantly peasant agricultural society, but it coexisted in real time with Western Europe, where industrial revolution had already taken place, liberal democratic states had already been established. And this unevenness, therefore, for Trotsky had major implications for how things in Russia itself would unfold. In other words, Russia could not, even if it wanted to repeat experience of Europe, Western Europe. It couldn't go through the same stages of history or modern development which Europe had gone through. This was, again, because Russia was coexisting with already industrialized, modernized societies. The implication of this was that internal pattern of development in Russia was inherently combined. And you can see this combination most vividly in the fact that Russian Tsarism was effectively a pre-modern absolutist form of state. And yet this pre-modern absolutist form of state led and organized one of the most rapid projects of industrialization in the world at the time. So a pre-capitalist state was leading a capitalist project of economic and industrial modernization. Now, and Russian state was doing this not because the rulers of Russia had a particular interest in capitalism as such. They were not in love with capitalism, so to speak, but they were doing this in order to reproduce themselves geopolitically and to survive the pressures of the West. And this created a kind of contradictory amalgam of various developments, which from Trotsky was at the heart of why Russia could produce a socialist or a workers-led revolution. And this was because a pre-modern state was creating a modern industrial base. And these two did not organically relate to each other, and therefore they were contradictory. And because Russian working classes were concentrated in large economic plants, so for example, steel industry in St. Petersburg had up to 30,000-40,000 workers in a single kind of plant, and therefore political organization of workers by the communists, but by the Bolsheviks, was rather easy because the industrial units were very, very large, even larger than what it was in the United States or in Germany. The other element of this unevenness for Russia was that Russian working classes had access to the most radical ideas which had emerged in workers' movement in Western Europe. In other words, because Russia had come later in time, it had the advantage of having access to already produced ideological and political forms in the form of, for example, Marxist theory, which meant that Russian working classes were actually more radical and more organized compared to, let's say, English working classes of the time, even though England had started capitalist development much earlier than Russia. On this basis, Trotsky made one of the very few cases of correct predictions in social and political science. So Trotsky disagreed with most of his comrades at the time and argued that actually a workers' revolution in Russia is inevitable because this contradiction exists. The state is not sustainable. The only social class which has the desire and organization to bring down the old regime is the working class. And once the workers are in power, they are forced by circumstances to adopt the most radical political program. In other words, the workers cannot fulfill what the bourgeoisie was supposed to do in the orthodox theory of revolution, that working classes, by virtue of being in power, they have to immediately move on to maximalist kind of program of social and political change. But he also, in a way, anticipated the major problems of a kind of socialist revolution in a pre-industrial society. In that sense, I think uneven and combined development was not only useful and very powerful in predicting what was going to happen in Russia, but also in the sense of the fate of such a revolution, because Trotsky correctly argued that because the majority of population in Russia are peasants, 80% maybe, the working class can actually kind of reproduce or sustain a socialist state by actually dispossessing the peasant classes. And this will create a tension between the workers and the peasants, which can cause major problems unless socialist revolutions also took place in Western Europe, and then working classes of Western Europe came to the help of Russian working class. Which is why for Trotsky, socialism was intrinsically international. A socialist revolution could not succeed in a single country. And this already kind of makes a huge difference between, let's say, Trotsky and Stalin, who believed in socialism in one country. Now, of course, I know that there are many debates whether actually Soviet Union was socialist or not. Here I'm talking about the moment of revolution, the fact that it was led by workers, and the fact that revolution's program was socialist. Now, the fact also that that revolution was not able to materialize its own program is related, but a different question.